Hello and welcome to the third and final episode of our special series called Evidence for the Existence of Macedonian Bulgarians 1852-1938 here on the Corridor 8 podcast on YouTube. In this concluding presentation, Professor Ivan D. Ivanov, who is Associate Professor at the University of Cincinnati and member of the Central Committee of the Macedonian Patriotic Organization, will present his knowledge and experience during his research on the history of the Macedonian Bulgarians. Ivan teaches courses in the University of Cincinnati, including Introduction to International Relations, US Foreign Policy, Politics of Europe, and International Institutions. As a member of the Central Committee of the Macedonian Patriotic Organization, he writes articles and organizes different very interesting and very inspiring research on the history and the presence and the heritage of the Macedonian Bulgarians in the United States of America and Canada. Here on this episode, Ivan is strictly in his personal capacity. I highlight his academic position at the University of Cincinnati and his role as a member of the Central Committee of the Macedonian Patriotic Organization in North America solely to underscore his exceptional professional expertise and organizational experience, which make him exceptionally well qualified to deliver such a scholarly based, evidence-based presentation on the historical evidence for the Macedonian Bulgarians. So we already have two very, very important episodes, part 1 and part 2 of this series. And now, building on this strong foundation, today, Ivan will deepen his analysis, presenting the key documents and evidence on this time for our audience. So let's begin.
Hello, Georgi. It is very nice to be back in your podcast, and on the frequencies of the Corridor 8, or I should say rather on the channel, on the Corridor 8 channel on YouTube. And it is indeed a true pleasure for me to continue our conversation about the existence of Macedonian Bulgarians, the evidence for their existence, the heritage that they have left. And we have selected particularly today as the day to do this presentation, which under the Gregorian calendar is Elinden, or the day of Saint Elijah. That is not just a religious holiday marking an important saint in the Christian tradition, but that was the day when the 1903 uprising started, which, as we will see from the records, initially was called the New Macedonian Uprising, and consequently later it earned the name of the Elinden Uprising, or in Bulgarian, it's called Elinden Preobrazhenia or Elinden Transfiguration, Saint Elijah and Transfiguration, because it actually took place in two different parts of the European Turkey, and the initial outbreak of the uprising happened and occurred on the day of Saint Elijah, Elinden, in the western part of that geographic space that you showed. And in the very eastern part, near the Black Sea, it happened on the celebration of Saint Elijah. So what we will talk today, and we have intentionally chosen this, it is also under the Gregorian calendar, Saint Elijah or Ilinden. It will be celebrated 2 weeks down the road in Macedonia, and the original date, August 3rd, which will be 2 weeks down the road under the what we call the old calendar. So people will have 2 weeks also to familiarize themselves with some of the evidence. So what I wanted to do is, starting with the Ilinden uprising, to show some original information published in the New York Times. We're going to show at least several articles from that period. We don't claim to be any exclusive, but I think it will be very interesting, particularly 3 days in a row, when the Ilinden uprising on the August 24th, 25th, and 26th was on the very first page of the New York Times. So the entire world was watching what was happening and was trying to find and provide information about the events. And then what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of the founders and the big revolutionaries of the Ilinden uprising, the founders of the Imerod, the organization Inter-Macedonian, or Macedonian Adrianople, as you always rightly remind us. There's actually quite a lot in the New York Times talking about the Adrianople part, the transfiguration part, or the part of the uprising that broke out on the day of Transfiguration, on the holiday of Transfiguration, which is a little bit later in August. And then we're going to learn a little bit about what Christos Tatarchev, the founder, Poparsov, Anton Dimitrov, what the founders of the organization have said. Some other notable leaders and revolutionaries. We're going to read a little bit of Chris Anastasov. We're going to read a little Henry Noel Brailsford. And the purpose of this is, of course, to use a lot of the language. So the purpose of this English language presentation is to inform the broader audience, as we said previous times, namely some of the members of the Macedonian Bulgarian diaspora in North America and around the globe, but also to inform the broader intellectual community around the world about the sources, the thinking, the mentality, if you want to see, but also their thoughts, their memoirs. So what we're doing this is translating original texts that are well familiar to us, because have been produced in Bulgarian by the founders of the organization, and now they will become available in English. And we're going to show the text in Bulgarian and in English, so that we're very clear that there's no any manipulation or any funny business going on here. We're very honest and very clear about it. And we're going to also use some English language sources. Again, New York Times as one of the newspapers, the leading newspapers of its time, and one that paid actually very close attention to these events. But we're also going to look at other big famous journalist, Henry Noel Brailsford, who actually wrote a whole book dedicated to Macedonia, the Macedonian struggle, and some of the description that he made there. So some of this was actually made available in Macedonian and in Bulgarian earlier. We made it last year, unfortunately, due to some issues that we have with a TV station in North Macedonia, which I think quite unjustly we are being accused of copyright infringement. I do believe there's nothing like copyright infringement, and I do believe that we will be validated over time, that we have rightfully and correctly used under fair use policy, YouTube's fair use policy, but rules the image of the person in question. However, in the meantime, what I really need to highlight, and I need to be very clear, is that unfortunately those videos are right now not available in Bulgarian Macedonian. So the English language version of this emissions are actually the only ones accessible. So we hope that a larger number of people, particularly those who don't speak Bulgarian Macedonian and don't understand them, can also get informed about original sources. So that's the whole purpose of this intellectual exercise that we're doing. So without further ado, let's get started with the presentation that I have shared with you. You can also show on the screen the link, because that same presentation that I am showing, that you have actually shown us now, is also available, Georgi, on a website, my homepage's website, so everybody can go on that website. It'll also be available under the video, and it will it can be accessed and read through and downloaded absolutely without any restrictions, So this is the first page. What I wanted to show you here is in particular that you're seeing the New York Times from August 24th, and the part underneath is from the August 25th. So I've only taken the first part. You can see that the top left corner is occupied by two articles. And what are they telling us from August 24th on the front page of the New York Times? So we're understanding that it's called the New Macedonian Revolt. That is what we now refer to the Linden Uprising. And it immediately says that there's a Macedonian revolt, but that the situation in the Adrianople Vilayet on the verge of panic. Adrianople Vilayet, this is Odrinsko or Odrinski Vilayet, because Adrianople is the Greek name of the town of Odrin, which was the main capital of the Vilayet or the district in the Ottoman Empire. The Adrianople Vilayet was on the map that Georgi showed you on the very eastern corner. Includes basically a large territory spreading along what is known as the geographic region of Thrace today, from down the Aegean coast through the Maritsa River to the plains, all the way to the town of Adrianople. Of course, there's a number of other smaller towns, Rosengat or Kirklareci, and all the way to the Black Sea, to the town of Vasiliko, which, of course, today is known as Tsarev. And so here's what the newspaper says on the Sofia correspondent. And the Times says attacked by the Macedonian insurgent on the Vasiliko. Vasiliko is the Tsarev region. So it's very interesting. Who are these Macedonian insurgents attacking Vasiliko? Seem to indicate that the revolution in the Adrianople Vilayet has hitherto been delayed, but order of the insurgent chiefs has now begun. So it marks the beginning of the transfiguration part of the uprising. It was inadvisable to attempt the rising owing to the open nature of the country, the mixed character of the population, and the strength of the Turkish troops concentrated at the Adrianople. But the Bulgarian population, exacerbated, and the ill treatment of the past 6 months had apparently broken loose, has rising up. The revolt in the Vilayet of Adrianople began on the night of August 13, the event of the Festival of Transfiguration. Preobrazhenie, what we call it in Bulgaria, and in Macedonia, I believe it's the same. Wires were cut in several districts and several Turkish villages, and military posts were attacked. The harvest in many places was destroyed. So it's clearly that when we're talking about Macedonian insurgents, Georgi, who are these Macedonian insurgents operating in the Adrianople region? Can you clarify for us?
Well, I would say these are the Thracian Bulgarians, actually, who were part of the same organization. So there is kind of mixture of the identities. Probably the people in New York didn't know exactly where exactly is Macedonia and where exactly is Thrace. They perceived the revolution in Thrace, in Adrianopolitan region, as part of the same revolution.
Exactly. And they are very clear that the population in Thrace, in Adrianople, is mixed. And if you read more carefully the article, it says there's a Turkish and Muslim element, there's also a Greek element, but there's also a Bulgarian element. And there are all Bulgarian population. But when they're talking about Macedonian insurgents, they mostly refer to the internal Macedonian revolutionary organization. So the insurgents are actually the leaders, the members, the comitages, as you will hear that term later on, who are part of the organization. For them, they're Macedonians in Vasiliki, in Tsarevo, on the Black Sea, as much as they're Macedonians in Bitola region. Because the term Macedonian does not just relate to the region of Macedonia in this case, but it refers to the organization and the members and the activists of the organization. And yes, I admit that even though they were operating in Adrianople, they sometimes omitted Adrianople, which is why Thracian part of the organization sometimes during that period tend to be overlooked. And I agree with you. What it also tells us in another article that we're seeing here is that the mean role that the Russians have played. If you read more carefully the article, I'm not going to spend a lot of time reading it, but it's the Russian ambassador, Mr. Zinoviev, laying claim on the Ottomans and sending a frigate potentially from Sevastopol, from Crimea, which was at that time under the Russian control, all the way down to Constantinople in a form of posing some threats. But when the Russian demands were met, the frigate at the port of, which was heading down the Black Sea to the port of Adrianople, withdrew and returned back, and it clearly says that the Russian position was that they are not going to support the uprising, something that, of course, the organizers of the uprising have hoped. We're also learning from that article that Ismaili Raki Pasha, the chief of the police at Palanca, which is Kriva Palanca, the province of Ushkup, or the vilayet of Ushkup, this is Skopje, or also the Kosovo vilayet, it's the same place, is restored to his post. The person under arrest for accusing Muslims of outreach and abuse are being liberated. Hussein Himli, the Inspector General of Macedonia, is reprimanding. This is the Ottoman authority who serves as Inspector General for the region of Macedonia, 3 vilayets, the Ushkup or Skopje vilayet, or Kosovo vilayet, the Bitola, and the Salonika vilayet. The chiefs of the gendarmerie and police at Salonika are replaced. So there's obviously an attempt for the Ottomans to do some damage control. Now we're moving, to the 25th of August, and we're looking again on the 25th of August what the New York Times writes. Of course, there's some stories about things going on in the United States, land scandal growing, big mining deal, but of course, now this time in the right side of the corner, we're seeing a lot of articles that say Turks lay waste Macedonian towns. So here again, the term Macedonian towns. The geographic region of Macedonia that we talk about exists. General massacre in Monastir Vilayet reported. The revolution is spreading, it has extended. This is a news coming from Sofia, actually, with the rumors, massacres, atrocities to the murder of prisoners, the Monastir Vilayet. Now, a threatened general situation is considered here as fast becoming intolerable. Official diplomatic circles are alike concerned, having and the horrors enacted in the interior of Macedonia have yet come to light. So it becomes clear at this point, 10 days or actually 20 days after the uprising has started, the amount, the scale of atrocities that were committed, mostly by, and we will see that, Bashibozuks, the irregular Turkish troops, not by the regular Turkish army. So we're hearing again and reading a much deeper explanation as to why the next day continues the newspaper. The Russians actually withdraw support for the revolution. The article from London clearly says that the Russians are concerned. The Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, it clearly says that, let's read it. The Paris correspondent of the Times says that one of the motives which led Russia to make every effort to prevent the spread of the Balkan Rising and maintain peace in Europe has profound distrust in Germany. So there's some issues with the Russian, German, and the Austro-Hungarian alliance, the Three Emperors alliance, which at this time was falling apart, and they were not trusting each other, but at the same time were trying not to violate the agreement. So the Times Russian correspondent regards the danger of the Far East as one of the factors which prevent Russia from contemplating any decisive coercive action on her own account against Turkey. The Vedomosti, the Russian newspaper, considers the Far Eastern question as one of the moments to Russia just now that the Macedonians and the Christians, then the Macedonians and the Christians in Turkey. So it is again saying that the Russians, of course, are concerned with their ability to fight. And in fact, we know that the war broke out a little bit later, the Russo-Japanese War. And so as they were concerned about the precarious situation, they did not want to go to war there. And that's why they were one of the reasons why they were reluctant. So again, their own national interest. And this is also important to know when somebody says, oh, Russians are our allies, they're our best friends, they care about Christian brothers. Well, yeah, but you can see that in this case, they were actually not they're not doing that. There's of course alarm in Salonika and explaining the situation. And remember, this is not Thessaloniki. They're still talking about Salonika, which is the Slavic name of the town. Solun or Salonika is the English version of the Solun. Thessaloniki is the Greco-English version of the town. Anyway, so we're also learning from August 25th that travelers arriving from Adrianople says that the Soviet correspondent state that a massacre of Christians took place early in the city Sunday and yesterday. This is again in the Adrianople village. You can see that they're not drawing any distinction between what is happening in Krushevo, what is happening in Bitola, what is happening in Buf, and in the Lerin region or Florina region, as they call it, and what is happening in the Adrianople vilayet, in particular, what is happening in the eastern part of the European
allow
Turkey.
me,
Yes, please.
Allow me to add here, the subtitle of this report is "Fighting at Many Points, Bunarhisar burned and Bulgarians there slain." So in the previous issues of the Times, it was the Macedonian Revolution, and now, or the Macedonian Uprising, and now here Bulgarians are noted as a specific ethnic group. So obviously there is a overlapping of the identities. The identity of the whole organization was sometimes perceived as Macedonian, as far as the same organization created the same uprising from Ohrid and Kostur at the west to the Black Sea point, as you mentioned before. So it was okay. Thank you.
And the reason why we're highlighting this is that this is often denied, underlooked, or rejected, bluntly rejected, denied, or at least not clarified by a large part of the Macedonian historiography and those who have borrowed from that historiography, present-day historiography in the Republic of North Macedonia. So this is why it's important to look at the original sources and see how this evidence has been presented back then. Furthermore, if you look at the paragraph, the third paragraph, another version to the effect that the Turkish officer endeavored to force an entrance into a Bulgarian house for the purpose of molesting one of the inmates. The inmates resisted, whereupon the Mohammedans became excited and bands of soldiers and Bashibuzuks attacked the Bulgarian quarter of the town. So it's clearly saying that this is, I think, Bunarhisar and near the city of Urgas. That's probably Burgas, because the way that they were sending it, sometimes you will see a missing word or a changed spelling of the name, but it's clearly that this is talking about Burgas and this is talking about Bunarhisar or Pinarhisar, I think it's present-day Turkish name again, and city which had mixed population, but they had a substantial Bulgarian quarter in the town of Bunarhisar and many of the villages. Now, we move on, Georgi. If you have anything to add, feel free to interrupt me, but we'll move on to the 26th of August. And 26th...
Just show one his book, and since you very correctly said that usually the Adrianopolitan part of the uprising is denied or forgotten by the historiography of North Macedonia. So these are three memoirs of one of the basic sources of the revolutionary struggle of mainly the Bulgarians in Macedonia, and also Vlachs and some other ethnic groups had their representatives of the same organization. But these three memoirs of Christos Silyanov are one of the key sources of the revolutionary movement. So letters and confessions of one Chetnik, memories from Stranja, and from Vitosha to Gramos. So memoirs from the time when Silyanov was together with Marko Lerinsky voivoda and Goce Delchev, memoirs from the uprising in Thrace, Adrianopolitan region, memoirs from the Balkan Wars, especially the first one. Very important sources since they are not very popular in North Macedonia and abroad. We feel obliged to share these sources with our audience so people could read in details about the events, the persons involved, and their identity. So this was
Excellent. And what I was going to say, Georgi, is just sorry to interrupt you, but this is actually something worth probably organizing a separate video, and we may very well plan to do that in the future as well.
I would like to add something, just one thing. I'm a Thracian, and a big part of my identity is based off my Thracian roots, my Thracian origins as a Thracian Bulgarian. This is part of my family memory, part of my family identity, and this memory shaped my personal identity. But since I have exactly this book with the 3 memoirs, I didn't read only the memoir about Thrace and the uprising in Thrace in 1903. I read all of them. His meetings, the meetings of Silyanov with Marko Lerinsky, who was Bulgarian from the eastern part of Bulgaria, his memoirs from the meetings with Chekalarov, with the revolutionaries in Thrace. So I read all the book. It's a very big, very important volume. So actually, even I am very devoted to the Thracian Bulgarians and their history. This is the way, actually, I must admit. Milyanov, this person who made me be interested in Macedonia during my childhood. So now, after this personal sharing, I give you, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Georgi. Yes, that's, of course, you are deeply connected to the topic and the theme of Macedonia. So we're moving to the August 26th, the third day in a row that we're looking. And what it says is that the title is Turks Threaten to Kill Consuls. That's again on the front page, on the left corner. New York Times talks about the Linden uprising. Turks threaten to kill consuls. Their plan to bring about intervention in Macedonia. So you can see that part of the reason was that the Turks were looking for an opportunity to have an intervention, whether by Bulgaria or Bulgaria and possibly some aid from a great power, so that the Turkish army could be deployed, not only in larger numbers in the Ottoman provinces of vilayets in European Turkey, but possibly on the territory of the Principality, which of course included not only the Principality, but Rumelia. Formerly Eastern Rumelia was a standalone province, but under the Act of Unification of 1885, it was fully incorporated in the Principality of Bulgaria, even though technically on the books there was still Eastern Romania. But regardless, the Turks were looking for an opportunity. And again, remember, at that time, Bulgaria still was not a fully independent state. So it was a principality under the authority of the Ottoman Sultan. What it meant is this was a hierarchical state of international relations, that it could not completely follow an independent foreign policy. And most importantly, it could not send an ambassador, somebody at the rank of an ambassador, as a foreign representative. What it could send is a consul or a minister extraordinary and plenipotentiary, which reflected the lower status of the Bulgarian state relative to the Ottoman state or relative to other states, including at that time the Serbian state, which had already gained full independence. Bulgaria was a tributary principality, and so was Eastern Romania, which was under the rule of the Bulgarian principality, technically under the rule of the Ottoman Sultan. So the Sultan had the right, if they wanted, to intervene not only in its Ottoman provinces, but even potentially in the principality, despite the very high level of autonomy that the principality enjoyed, completely its own financial, its fiscal policy, its trade relationship was standalone, but still the Ottoman And so this was the importance why Bulgaria never intervened. Had Bulgaria intervened, 50,000 Turkish troops were ready to go and take over completely the authority of the principality. The principality alone stood no chance against the Ottoman troops in the Ottoman Empire. And everybody in the military knew that very well. So this is an important thing also to understand. Then the New York Times tells 12 more villages handed over to fire and sword. Story of the pillage of Khrushchev and the horrible outrages committed there. Bashibuzuk showed up with dynamite, And then it goes to a correspondent of the Times, says that the state of the Vilayet of Monastir, or the province of Monastir, that's Bitulski Vilayet, as described in the official dispatches from the best informed consuls in Macedonia, it is absolutely intolerable. Turkish repressive measures have reached the utmost limits of barbarism, with the evident intention of gradually extirpating the Bulgarian population. Remember, he's talking about a Bulgarian population in the Monastir or Bitula Vilayet, something that is bluntly and blatantly denied in the Macedonian historiography. 12 more villages during the last few days have been handed over to fire and sword. Women, children, and aged persons have been massacred indiscriminately. Even the local Turks, it is stated, are so disgusted with the methods which are being pursued that they are meditating the assassination of the consuls in order to bring on European intervention. Whether the wholesale devastation and a rapid is due to a systematic plan or the lawlessness of the soldiery and the Bashibuzuks, the results are the same. Whether it was intended or whether it was just because Bashibuzuks had lost their minds and they were out of control, well, it didn't really matter. The program of the revolutionaries is being fulfilled to the letter. The insurgents are doubtless taking terrible revenge. Lex Talon is being in full operation. Furthermore, what we learn about is the specifics about what is happening in Khrushchev. This is the Khrushchev Republic and the evidence about the Khrushchev Republic. It says again, the Macedonian Committee. And for the Macedonian Committee, it usually refers to the Supreme Committee, the supremacists who are based in Skopje and who are oftentimes accused as Bulgarophiles, in concert with the Bulgarian bands. So the organization itself is a Macedonian, but the bands that operate, well, there's no doubt, to the New York Times correspondent, what is their identity? And they clearly call it Bulgarian bands. Has been completing arrangements during several months with a view of occupying the town. In July last, the authorities of Khrushchev, observing the threatening movement, begged the Vali of Monastir. This is basically the police chief of Monastir, to send reinforcement at the garrison of 30 soldiers because that was insufficient to cope with the insurgent attack. These warnings were ignored. On August 2nd, this is the beginning of the uprising, the day fixed for the Bulgarian attack on Khrushchev. Remember again, Georgi, here he was talking about a Bulgarian attack on Khrushchev. Not a Macedonian attack on Khrushchev, not some other attack on Khrushchev, but a Bulgarian attack on Khrushchev. Why are they using the word Bulgarian? Think about it. While 4 marriages were being celebrated in the Greek church, these are the Greco-Mans or possibly Vlach population under the ecumenical patriarchy of Constantinople, a number of comitages. Comitages are basically the members of the Imaro, the activists, committed, as we call them, by pre-arrangement, remained hidden in the church and were locked by the on the conclusion of the ceremonies. At 10 o'clock at night, they sounded the alarm of ringing the church bells. And we all know that story about ringing the church bells in Khrushchev in the beginning. Simultaneously, a band of 300 insurgents headed by Petrov entered the town, discharging their rifles. Those terrified inhabitants remained indoors. The band first burned the residence of the Mudir. This is the local leader, the local mayor, and then massacred the garrison of Turkish soldiers and the officials of the town. But the invaders spared the Turkish harems. Again, because a lot of the people living in the harems, whether females or whatever, were considered civilians. So they Sparta, they only massacred the military, not the women serving the military, and the mudir. On the following morning, the Comitages, this is Imaro again, the revolutionaries, established a provincial government. This is the government that we all know as the Khrushchev government, and instituted a new police and municipality. They killed 10 Christians who they believed had betrayed the plans of the committee. This is particularly the traitors, and most of those were Greco-Mas, and oftentimes Greco-Mas were not on board with the uprising. Some of them were. Some Greco-Man villages also rose, but some were against and were ratting out the uprising. The nobles of the town were compelled to contribute $10,000 to the revolutionary fund. And again, we're talking about the Bulgarian villagers in the neighborhood. Hearing that Khrushchev was in the hands of the insurgents, entered in the town and demanded ammunition, which, however, was unobtainable. So not only the Comitages, but the villagers, who are clearly called Bulgarian at that time, in the surrounding villages surrounding the town of Khrushchev, which were in the hands of the insurgent, entered the town and demanded ammunition, which, however, was unobtainable. The provisional government constructed a rampart enclosing the town, and the inhabitants were ordered to melt down their spoons to make bullets. This is very, very well known, not only from that part of the history, but also even we know that from the April uprising. That's what they were doing. Anything that they get, any metal that they could melt to make bullets and to use those as bullets to fight, Then it continues further on. It says on August 13th, on August 13th, the Turks concentrated 7 battalions and 1 battery at Khrushchev. They made an offer to the Comitages, this is the Imaro, the revolutionaries, to allow the women and children to leave the town. This proposal was declined, and the bombardment began. The Comitages quickly abandoned the town, and they escaped in the neighboring forest, whereby pursuit was impossible. The Turks entered the town and, guided by the Turkish villagers from the neighborhood, attacked the houses of the chief of the main nobles and ordered inmates to be reached and stripped. They seized the money and jewels and assaulted the women. Those who resisted were being immediately killed. A Greek priest who sought to protect his daughter was killed. The girl's earrings were torn out, and her hand was chopped off to secure a bracelet. This is again how the Turkish troops approached. When the houses had been pillaged, the Turkish peasants loaded their horses with whatever the soldiers left, and the residences were burned. The attack on Khrushchev lasted 3 days, during which the time the women and children remained without food and shelter, and at the mercy of the soldiers and the Pashipusuks. Again, yes, we hear how terrible they were treated and how tragic this event was. This is again on the very first page of the New York Times from August 26, 1903. Now, let's look at a couple of other earlier publications. As early as May 25th, the New York Times reports about all of the male Bulgarians in the town of Jumaya. Jumaya today is Gorno Jumaya or Blagoevgrad town. And it says that again, that the Times representative Sofia says a frontier correspondent sends word that Albanian troops continue to arrive in Jumaya and that their presence is inspiring much terror. The male population of the Bulgarian quarter has practically disappeared, and the women are wearing mourning. That's because of an attack was done. Men were women in hiding, and so on. This was preceding the Ilinden uprising. We also learned from the 21st. This was not on the front page, however. That's why I've put it here separately. That a report from European Turkey saying that on Fridays, August 21st, the villages of Bufi, this is the village of Buf. Buf is the Latin. Rakovo is Buf is an exarchist village, a Bulgarian village, Macedonian Bulgarian village. Rakovo is a patriarchist village. This is misspelled Rakoro, but it's Rakovo, and it's again both of those are very close to each other in the mountainous area of the Lerino Florina region, and Armesco near Florina have been bombarded, and their insurgent garrisons annihilated. At the Bufi alone, 500 Bulgarians are reported to have been killed. This is probably 500 villagers, population. And they're very clearly identifying the population of the village of Buf as Bulgarian. Well, we know we had a Bulgarian church, we had a Bulgarian school, which the building of which is still standing and preserved. And we have a lot of immigration also from the Buf, including the priest in Cincinnati, Stephen Kostov, is exactly from that village originates. So it clearly says that those were Bulgarians. And in the New York Times, in the engagement at the Ostrov, August 1914, committed Jews were killed during another fight near Ohrid. This is Ohrid. 217 Bulgarians were killed. Again, his New York Times is talking about Bulgarians that existed, that lived in the village of Ohrid, and 217 of whom were being killed. An important action in proceeding near Florina. The commandant there demanded immediate reinforcement. 12 battalions have started for Florina from Monastir. And then, of course, on August 22nd, it says that the uprising is spreading, and it's spreading in the vilayet of Adrianople, something that we discussed and talked about. Georgi, let me just read one more piece, and then I'll give you a chance if you want to react. And that is particularly at the beginning of in fact, several days after the beginning of the uprising in Krushevo again. This was from August 13th. So this was an earlier, where I showed you 24th, 25th, and 26th, but this goes back to the 13th, so 9 days earlier. A report says that information from Monastir is to the effect that the insurgents have occupied Klisura and Pisoder. Klisura and Pisoder, again, are those, if you drive from the lake region, from the lower Prespa Lake all the way to Lerin or Florina on the road. These are the two villages next to each other. Klisura, by the way, there's a famous song about the Battle of Klisura and the Chakalarov, exactly referring to the Ilinden uprising. And Pisoder is, in fact, a Vlach or a Romanian village. In Klisura is the chief town of the Sanjak of Nahis, the vilayet of Monastir. So it's a small Sanjak there. It's a smaller unit, basically, a municipality out of the large district, And then it says 4,000 Turkish troops are bombarding Krushevo. So we read that had also occurred. On the 13th, it reports that this is still an ongoing process, which is still in the hands of the insurgents. The insurgents, of course, are the Imaro. Or the Komitajes. And the Bulgarians in the Krushevo and the Reka districts are suffering severely. So again, it clearly says that these people are Bulgarians. It's not clear if it's talking about the Bulgarian insurgents or the Bulgarian population. Either way, in Krushevo and the Reka district is basically this region, the Miak region down near Debar, near Lazaropole, and of course near help me out, this very famous town next to Lazaropole, where the Miak population lives also. And they are clearly referring to that population as Bulgarian. Yes, that is what the newspapers are saying. Do you want to say something? Do you want to add something? Or do you want me to continue with this memorandum? The only reason I'm reading the memorandum is because there's also misinformation spread about the memorandum, and then we can continue after that.
Yeah, before the memorandum, since you mentioned a lot of times Krushevo, and of course it is a very important city, town in Macedonia, the Krushevo Republic, we have to remind to our audience that actually the insurgents in Krushevo elected a government, provisional government, with six members, which we now can call ministers. They didn't have exactly this title, but still their positions were exactly like this, to control and to govern different spheres of the public life during the uprising. So this was a part of the local self-governance of the people in Krushevo. These six people were divided between the three main ethnic and ethno-cultural groups in the town: Bulgarians, Vlachs, and I can't remember, maybe the members of the Greek universal,
the patriarchists, yes,
the patriarchists, who belonged in a certain way to this national project. So one of the Bulgarian ministers was Dimitar Sekulov. And we had the honor, the privilege, and the very good luck to interview his great-granddaughter, Eli Sekulovska, who is actually a very prominent defendant of the human rights of the people in Macedonia, especially the people with Bulgarian ethnicity.
Macedonian Bulgarian ethnicity. Yes, that's exactly correct. So what I meant is the two villages, I'm sorry, just to add, is Galichnik and of course Galichnik, Tresonic, and Lazaropole. This area, this mountainous area, because of the river around it, is known also as the Reka district. So this is where the reference to the Bulgarians comes also.
And it was the 3rd of March, the 8th of March, it was the International Women's Day, when we had this very, very inspiring, very, very deep conversation with Eli Sekulovska. She lives in Bitula, and she actually told us about her family history. So from the general topic of the women's rights, we focused our conversation on her family's history, especially the women in her family who suffered a lot during the communist regime for their Bulgarian identity. And then we spoke about her great-grandfather, Dimitar Sekulov, who was one of the ministers of the Krushevo Republic. And it's in Bulgarian, but I do believe that we can suggest to all our viewers to watch this video. There are subtitles. They can read the story of Eli Sekulovska and her family history. By the way, we have here also one of your comments, and you asked here, Eli told us what is the identity, how the identity of Dimitar Sekulovsky is presented in the museum of Bitula. And she said, well, he's presented as Bulgarian, as a Macedonian, but he was Bulgarian. And his children, his family, his descendants were later sentenced to prison as Bulgarians in Yugoslav Macedonia during Tito, Kulishevsky, and Apostolsky regime. So this is the story of one of the ministers in the Krushevo Republic and his descendants. It's very, very important to watch to this, to use the subtitles if necessary. I highly recommend this personal story. And now let's go back to the presentation of Ivan. Thank you.
Very much. So, yes, that is exactly correct. And it's a very full circle that the events in which Eli Sekulovska's great-grandfather was involved, was engaged, and is well documented in the New York Times. Those are well documented, and then actually we had interviewed one of the descendants of the member of that government, and he was a minister of health. Actually, that her great grandfather was a minister of health in the provisional government that the New York Times is talking about. Now, knowing and learning about the Ilinden uprising, we also read that it is reported that the Bulgarian insurgents have massacred the inhabitants of the large Turkish village of Kenati. Kenati still exists, although much of its Turkish residents have moved out, or other things have happened, but still the village is right on the border between Turkey and Greece. And yes, it is again talking about the Bulgarian insurgents, the Macedonian committee, the Macedonian organization. But at the same time, when we talk about the Bulgarian bands and the Bulgarian insurgents, I think New York Times is very clear about that. Only 20 said to have escaped. Insurgent bands frequently visit Kastoria. Kastoria is the Kostur, the main town in the Kostur Kaza. A big fight is proceeding in Diabat near Monastir, and so on and so forth, in Mitrovica and in other villages as well. Now, what I wanted to show you is that on August 16th, the New York Times also reported about the first of several memorandums that Bulgaria sent to powers. And it's titled exactly that, Memorandum from Bulgaria to Powers. And it says that Bulgarian government tells of Turkish atrocities in Macedonia. A terrible record of massacres, murders, tortures, and oppression. Particulars are all obtained from official sources. The Bulgarian government has presented a memorandum to the powers meaning the great powers. That is the Austrian government, the German, the Russian, the British, and the French government, European powers, setting out at great length the conditions of affairs during the past 3 months in Macedonia, since the Turkish government undertook to inaugurate the promised reforms. Now, you have to understand that Bulgaria is in also a very precarious situation. Bulgaria has to be, on the one hand, saying that it is not intervening, has to show that it's not intervening in any way or stimulating any uprising, because if that was the case, it is facing the risk of being attacked by 50,000 Turkish troops waiting on the border. But at the same time, Bulgaria is the one saying that the Christian population, particularly the Bulgarian or the Macedonian Bulgarian population, suffers tremendously in all 4 vilayets, and that it is pleading the Ottomans to implement reforms, and it's asking great powers to help implement those reforms, And it says that the situation actually got worse since the Ottomans promised to start the reforms, Places and names of persons are given to the memorandum, the whole constituting a terrible category of murder and torture, incendiarism, pillage, and general oppression committed by the Ottoman soldiers and the officials. Then it continues, the memorandum begins by stating that during the past 3 months the Ottoman government has taken a series of measures with the alleged intention of inaugurating an era of promised reforms and of assuring peace and tranquility in the Bulgarian population of European Turkey, but which have had contrary effect of further exacerbating the population, reviving the revolutionary movement. Whole-scale massacres, and it further on goes and documents what exactly has happened. It says whole-scale massacres, individual murders and destruction of villages, the pillaging of and setting on fire of houses, arrests, ill-treatment, tortures, arbitrary imprisonment and banishment, and closing and disorganizing of churches and schools, the ruining of merchants, the collection of taxes for many years in advance. Such proceeds the memorandum, proceeds the memorandum are among the acts of the Ottoman administration of the vilayets of Salonika, Monastir, Ushkup, Skopje, in other words, and Adrianople or Odry. Monastir is, of course, Bitola also. The memorandum next relates in detail a number of such cases in each vilayet, beginning with the vilayet of Salonika. It states that in the town of Salonika itself, the Bulgarian professors of the university, this is the Bulgarian high school, which is called at that time, for some reason called university, the students, the shopkeepers, in fact, all of the intelligent Bulgarians in the city have been cast into prison. 120 soldiers entered the village of Gorna Ribnica. This is, I think, in Bulgaria, actually, in the Blagoevgrad region near the border, Ribnica, on May 19th, and tortured to death 5 men and 2 women. During the first 3 weeks of July, 25 villagers in the district of Tikvesh, Tikveshirta, you know where it is, were subjugated to depredication of the Turkish soldiers and the Bashibazuks. The villagers were beaten and tortured. The women were beaten. The women were assaulted, and the houses plundered while the administrative authorities looked on. In the vilayet of Monastir, artillery bombarded and razed and raised the flourishing town of Smedrish, the 300 houses being left a heap of ruins. At the beginning of July, two Greek bands, with the convenience of the authorities, pillaged the Bulgarian villages and murdered many of their inhabitants. It clearly tells you that the Greek bands or the Greek Andarts were on the side of the Ottomans, or at least did not support in any way. In fact, resisted very much the organizers of the uprising. The Vilayet of Ushkup, the entire Bulgarian population, again, there's Bulgarian population in the Vilayet of Ushkup or Skopje, or the Vilayet of Kosovo, also called, has been systematically persecuted since the last May. The director of the normal school at Ushkup was imprisoned because his library contained the revolutionary books of Otello and Les Miserables. In the districts of Palanka, Kriva Palanka today, Kočeni, still Kočeni, Kumanovo, and Gostivar. Gostigar is spelled, but it's Gostivar. The prisons are filled with Bulgarian priests, schoolmen, and merchants. These are the, as we spoke about this many times, the key intellectuals. These were the leaders of the local community, and these were the locomotives, the driving forces of the Bulgarian national idea in the districts of Palanka, Kočeni, Kumanovo, and Gostivar. During June, the soldiers and Bashi Buzuks terrorized the inhabitants of the Shtip is written, but it's Shtip district, tortured the people with red-hot irons. Similar atrocities perpetuated in the villages of Adrianople are cited. And then it goes on and says that in summarizing the specific details of the outrages mentioned, the memorandum declares that the whole-scale massacres were perpetuated by regulars and Bashibuzuk. So it wasn't just the irregular Bashibuzuk troops, but also some regular Turkish troops in the town of Salonika and the villages of Baldevo, Banica, Lerisku, Čukuriluku, Karbinca, Mogila, Smedrish, and Enijevar, while the scenes of carnage, pillage, and incendiarism were everywhere terrible. At Smedrish, over 200 Bulgarians were shot. So it really tells you what the population of Smedrish was. Killed with swords or burned to death. Over 250 houses and the churches and schools were set on fire, with petroleum and pillaged, and the property being sold by the soldiers and Bashibuzuks in the neighboring places. Similar scenes occurred in the villages of Gorna Ribnica, Igumenica is still on the border, Dobrilaki, and Nikuden. The villagers there abandoned their homes and fled to the mountains. So I think, first of all, we will see that in September. There's another memorandum that Bulgaria sends to the powers, and it's also very much described in detail. The reason why I am taking the time to go over this memorandum Bulgaria to the powers is there was a very famous and very nice Bulgarian intellectual who went on Bulgarian TV and said that Bulgaria has made no single protest and not expressed in any way disapproval of what happened. That is just bluntly and openly not true. Memorandum was sent. The first one was from the August 16th, and you can very clearly see that the text of the memorandum is very well documented in detail. So that is, and then of course this is also repeated by the Macedonian historiography, the regular intellectuals in North Macedonia, and the regular trolls and bots on the internet. That is just not true. Here is the evidence. Here is the newspaper. Read it. Familiarize yourself. I'm sorry about Stefan Tsanev and what he said, but this was a complete lie and misinformation. I think somebody has misled him, and we need to make sure to show that information. Please read it. It's publicly accessible as long as you have subscription to a New York Times, which costs $12 a month. You can also get access to a time machine and read those articles because it's completely digitalized. And by the way, it's not just New York Times. I'm using New York Times because I'm a subscriber of the New York Times, but you can use any other major English language newspaper and see that there happens to be a lot of information documenting this period. Please, go ahead.
So I would also like to add that, as far as I remember, and you once showed another document about this, actually the Russian government directly warned Bulgaria, the Bulgarian government, that if Bulgaria tries to get involved in this conflict, in the uprising, and support the insurgents, actually, the Russian military will stop the Bulgarian army.
The Russian military will give a go-ahead and will not intervene in the case the Turkish army, which was positioned on the border in Thrace and ready to go into Rumelia, into the territory of the principality, they would not object to it.
So I think it's very important, because this is another slander from the historians in North Macedonia and from the politicians, but also from the trolls on the social networks. Why Bulgaria didn't help? Well, there is a big danger in this moment, especially the Russian empire. So it was hard thing to get involved in this situation. And as far as I remember, the Bulgarian Minister of War, as it was at the time called, now it's the Ministry of Defense, sent a letter to the revolutionary organization that at the moment the Bulgarian army and the Bulgarian state is not ready to participate in order to help the insurgents. And this was before the uprising. So actually, the revolutionary organization was very well informed that at the moment, all the rebels will be on themselves alone.
On their own. Yes, that's correct. That is correct. And then there was this big debate inside. Actually, part of it was at the Smilevo Congress, discussed whether going on your own, knowing that you have no capacity to resist, despite the fact that this was a very powerful organization, to resist regular Turkish Ottoman army and the irregular Bashibuzuks and all this, including, as we hear, that the Greek Andarts helping out, the Greek bands helping out the Ottomans in that time. And the question is, so we were going to basically send the people, the regular insurgents and the population to the carnage, we'll turn them into carnage. And if you remember, even Delchev himself was very much against it. I always very vividly remember a quotation. It says that we're going to look like a beggar who's going to dig deep into his wounds and take the pus out of the wounds to say, oh, give me, please help me out. That's not how we should be doing, because that was going to destroy the population. That is going to we need to preserve and protect the population, the integrity of the community, and then look for the opportunity. That was Delchev's perspective, while others, hot-headed, said, no, this is the right time. The situation is boiling up. Regardless of whether Bulgaria can help us, they may or may not. Regardless of whether the international, we will get the sympathy from the international community. And they did get the sympathy. As you can see here, they were every single day on the New York Times, easily half a page, quarter to half a page dedicated to what's happening in the Ottoman provinces. And on 3 days in a row, they're on the front page. And you saw that, regardless, the population went carnage. And we looked up, Georgi, by the way, you remember when we looked at the population censuses, official Ottoman censuses, we're seeing a decline of the Bulgarian population in the Ottoman Macedonia from about 750,000 documented in the late 19th century, 1889, 1892 to 1907. The last, we see about 100,000 less, people. Even though you had more villages and more population center under Bulgarian exarchate tradition and identifying as Bulgarians, overall population decline because people are fleeing to Europe, to North America. People are fleeing in mass to Bulgaria. People are fleeing, and we've also cited a lot of other sources documented that much more so. Interestingly, in Thrace, the population did not decline. It went up from 100,000 to 120,000. But in the vilayet of Adrianople. But in the other three vilayets, it declined by a good 100,000 people, which was about 20%, And so, yes, Delchev was right about it, But again, you have to understand the circumstances here in the memorandum under which Bulgaria was operating. But please understand, it's a lie when somebody tells you that there was no memorandum set. There it is. You see it and you read it. And so what I'm suggesting, Georgi, if you don't mind, let's just move on. It's a little bit more of a...
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
One last thing, very, very short.
Go ahead.
The village of Smrdesh, which is the last thing underlined with red, it's in the area of Kostur, Kostursko. Today in Greece, it's called Kastoria. And I know about this village since the memoir of Christos Silyanov called From Vitusha to Gramus. He was together with the band of Vasil Chekalarov. Silyanov had his own band, revolutionary band. During the Second Balkan War, Chekalarov died in Aegean Macedonia. He was from this area of the...
Aegean Macedonia.
Yeah. So several days ago, we remembered the memory of Vasil Chekalarov, and his personality is very well presented in the memoir of Christos Silyanov. So again, I recommend to everybody, read these books, read the original sources. This is how we can have more information. This is how we will free ourselves and our friends from North Macedonia from the lies and the defamations presented by the propaganda machine there. So thank you.
Or at least the misinformation and disinformation, because again, the fact somebody saying that there was no single memorandum, when you're reading it, it's clearly a misinformation and disinformation, regardless of who says that. And so this is what we're reading here is an article that was published on 18th of July 1933, and it was 30 years after the Ilinden uprising on the occasion of the 30th anniversary. And it's the Dr. Hristo Tatarchev. Dr. Hristo Tatarchev is one of the 6 founders and the first president of the Internal Macedonian Adrianople Revolutionary Organization, IMARO. Or Imaro later became known. So I here missed the Imaro. I hope Georgi won't be terribly upset with me. But he's the founder and the first president. He says the following text: the Ilinden uprising was 30th, not 13th. I'm so sorry. There's a typo here. Anniversary will be celebrated by the Macedonian Bulgarian. Was a general outburst under the impulse and fate of which Macedonia had been preparing for a number of years and had made all possible moral and material sacrifices for this great moment. It was to come after a long year of revolutionary activity. Indeed, that's true. The organization took 10 years to prepare for that event. That's why they were eager to do the uprising, regardless of what the outcome is. This is a grandiose and sublime event in history for the vindication of freedom in its design, purpose, and systematic implementation, as well as in its enthusiasm. It was a rare search and self-sacrifice of the slave against the centuries-old oppressor in his homeland. The Macedonian Bulgarian stood out here with his lofty spirit, strong character, and indomitable will with which he raised himself in the struggle to achieve his ideal, the freedom of Macedonia, as a powerful people with clearly outlined national outlook, sense, and conscience. Its historical significance generally lies not only in that massive, intense spontaneity with which the uprising was waged for months throughout the country, the Ottoman Macedonia, and with the Ottoman, I should say actually, the Ottoman Europe, and with which it was possible to protest in most impressive way against the European diplomacy that supported the tyranny in Macedonia, but primarily in the personal and collective self-sacrifice, in that indomitable will that raised the Macedonian to unparalleled heights in the action to specify the idea of freedom that ignited and inspired him. So he's talking about Macedonian, and by Macedonian he means everybody who lives in Macedonia. He talks about Macedonia as a territory, as a geographic space, but he talks about the unique role that the Macedonian Bulgarian, the Bulgarians from Macedonia, the unique role that they played in the uprising. And he again insists very much, not just any Bulgarian, but in particular the Bulgarians in Macedonia or the Macedonian Bulgarian. Tatarchev continues further on in the same article. The aspiration of the Macedonian fighter, again, Macedonian fighter is everybody in the organization fighting for the freedom of Macedonia. In this unequal but great struggle was a cause imbued with sublime idealism and boundless final love for the native land, as well as deep awareness and faith in the building the freedom of Macedonia. Remember, he's not talking here yet in 1903 about independence of Macedonia. He's talking about autonomy and freedom. Whether and how that freedom will be achieved, they are very flexible about it. And yes, they're all Macedonians, not just those who are in the organization, but everybody who lives in the region. And they're all trying to get the freedom of that region. But in that region, we see that also the struggles endured by the Macedonian Bulgarian people before and during the uprising for the freedom of Macedonia enriched and broadened their worldview in understanding life and created an inextricable link between them and the cause, an asset that can never be erased. So he talks about the Macedonian Bulgarians people. He talks about the love of the Macedonian people for the land of Macedonia, for the cause of the freedom of Macedonia, and the inextricable link that exists between the revolutionaries and the cause of the freedom, the liberation of Macedonia, the democratization of this space called Macedonia. Georgi, anything? You want to add anything?
You better go on with the presentation.
Okay. We continue with Ivan Hadjinikov, another of the founders of why was still Tatarchev important? It's also important to highlight that today, when we celebrate in Bulgaria the Ilinden or Ilinden Preobrazhenie uprising, the Ilinden Transfiguration uprising, we always highlight these Macedonian Bulgarians. And people in Macedonia are upset, saying that we're denying them the right of self-identification. No, it's about all the Macedonians who participated. But in that particular moment, the key element, the driving force, it was the Macedonian Bulgarian people or the Macedonian Bulgarian. And it's not just because I think like this, or the Bulgarian historiography thinks about it, or the world historiography thinks, but it's because the founder of the organization that organized this uprising, Dr. Hristo Tatarchev, who wrote it 30 years after the uprising in the newspaper called Ilinden, in the Macedonian affairs, and he wrote this article about the Ilinden, a symbol of freedom and unity. And so that's why it's important. Ivan Hadjinikov, in his memoirs, he published them in 35, 37, a few years before he died. He talks about his memoirs of how the organization was created, 1893, and he talks about his experiences being a teacher in the Bulgarian high school, men's high school in Thessaloniki, Saint Cyril and Methodius, or Saint Cyril and Methodius High School in Thessaloniki, or Salonika, I should rather say. And in his memoirs, he describes, first of all, what was the situation, what kind of people were members, and particularly one episode with Vasil Kanchov, which we will read. Vasil Kanchov was a teacher. He was also a great explorer of Macedonia. He was born in Vraca in northern Bulgaria, and he went to Salonika to teach, but he also documented the villages, And his favorite for the Macedonian historiography, because he talks about this idea of, I came here to Bulgarize you, to turn you into Bulgarians, basically. And then Ivan Hadjinikov gave him a very profound rebuke and a very strong and very forceful response. So he says the following: the teachers, this was an excerpt from the from his memoirs. The teachers coming from Bulgaria submitted an application to the director in November to be allowed to eat in the boarding house, provided they paid for their meals. So this basically tells you that you had teachers coming from Bulgaria and teachers from the geographic region of Macedonia. They all identified as Bulgarians, some of them as Bulgarians, just Bulgarians, or Bulgarians from Bulgaria, or Thracia, whatever Bulgarians. The others were Macedonian Bulgarians. So those who came from Bulgaria also wanted to eat, provided that they paid the fee in the boarding house, and they got a permission. While eating together, I witnessed their constant insinuations about the Macedonian Bulgarians, accusing them of weak patriotism. So this is, again, something that is oftentimes misquoted with people in Bulgaria, but also misquoted with people in Macedonia. You give me money and I will call myself a Bulgarian. And the like. And so, of course, it's one thing to grow in free Bulgaria. It's another thing to grow in Ottoman Macedonia, where you have, first of all, a huge diversity of ethnicities, struggle of different national ideas, and a foreign rule, basically an Ottoman rule, which was not a Bulgarian rule. So quietly, here's what Hadjinikol says. I pointed out to them that the struggle of the Macedonian Bulgarians against foreign propaganda, that means Greek, possibly Serbian, but also possibly Ottoman influence, was struggle more intense and far greater than the struggle of the Bulgarians from the other Bulgarian geographical regions, namely Dobruja, Mysia, and Thrace. But they still continue to ridicule their southwestern compatriots, whose children they were called upon to teach and educate. Yes, it also tells you that there is a growing gap between Macedonian Bulgarians growing under yoke, and we'll see that in Shatev also words, and then the Bulgarians from the Principality, unfortunately. But says one day when he met with this teacher, Vasil Kanchev, on the seaside, they went to have a coffee at this cafe called the Bellevue Cafe in Salonika. And so Kanchev was very talkative. And by the way, in his stories, he said that a teacher had come to Thessaloniki, as a teacher has come to Thessaloniki to Bulgarize Macedonia. And so the response that Ivan Hadjinikol gave, this was too much and too strongly said. I objected to him that he should not talk like this and that he overestimates himself. For Macedonia has long been Bulgarian, and that the Macedonian Bulgarians have been fighting the routine for a long time. Macedonia needs enlightenment, which all teachers and clergymen currently have to spread. Kancho felt offended, and from there on, he started hating Hadjinikol. Then, after 5 years of co-teaching at the Salonika High School, he forced me to give up my position and then presented me to the Exarchate. Again, the Bulgarian Exarchate is running not only the churches, but the schools, At the local level, they're run by an NGO called the Bulgarian communes or the Bulgarian municipalities, which of course now they're authorities, but back then they were NGOs running a church, running a school, and running a community centers, basically. And the Exarchate is the one that binds together all these schools and churches, and for transfer to the town of Serres or Ser, where I did not go, and left teaching. So he left the whole profession of teaching and started basically opened a bookstore and became a bookkeeper, basically a bookstore owner, a small entrepreneur, selling mostly Bulgarian books, And the last part that I wanted to say is because there's oftentimes a misperception that the organization was set up in the home of Hadjinikol. That is actually not true, because according to the Hadjinikol's memoirs, at the agreed upon time on Friday in the evening of October 23rd, 1893, all 6 founders gathered at no one else but Hristo Batangiev's place. Now, Hristo Batangiev was more famous, more established, but most importantly, Hristo Batangiev was also the president of that non-governmental organization called Bulgarian Commune of Salonika. The Bulgarian Commune of Salonika was running the high school, the men's and the women's high school, was running also the Bulgarian churches. So it was basically the head that ran all of those educational, religious, and community organizational centers of the Bulgarian community in Salonika. So Hristo Batangiv was the president of that organization. And I explained the purpose and so on and so forth. So he was basically the one who explained why and how the organization was set up. Georgi, before we go to Petr Poparsov, do you want to add something about Hadži Nikolov?
Thank you very much for everything you presented until now. I don't have other comments. So thank you.
So let's take Poparsov and then Anton Dimitrov. Poparsov, again, he's writing this article in his memoirs, how they came about the idea of establishing Imorov. That's his perspective. So we heard Hristo Tatarchev's perspective, the president and the founder. We heard Ivan Hadži Nikolov's perspective, another founder, not the president, and a teacher, and then Poparsov. Now, Poparsov from the village of Bogomila in basically central Macedonia, not far from Veles. And so he writes the following. The brutal policy of Serbianization, which denied all human dignity of the Macedonian Bulgarians and cruelly wounded their national feelings, clearly patronized by the representatives of the Russian Tsar and actively supported by the government of the Turkish Sultan, which artificially created scandals and threw the Bulgarians into prisons and exiles, took away their churches and schools, created a tragedy in the souls of that 1 million strong Bulgarian people. Now, you can see that in Hadži Nikolov's case, but also in Poparsov's case, these people are not just Bulgarians or Macedonian Bulgarians. They are very strong they have very strong national feelings and very strong feelings against everybody who denies their Bulgarian feelings. Probably they would have very strong feelings against present-day Imorov Depomania leadership in Skopje for denying their Macedonian Bulgarian origin, even though they're celebrated as Macedonians, but not as Macedonian Bulgarians. So this is the paradox that we're facing. So that's why we're also reading some of the memoirs. So patronized by the representative Russians are actively supported by the government of the Turkish Sultan, which artificially created scandals through Bulgarians to prison success, to the churches, was created a tragedy in the soul of this million-strong Bulgarian people, a tragedy which became even more terrible considering that Serbianization meant not only denationalization, lose of their national sentiments, but also subordination of the Macedonians, Bulgarians under the authority of the Greek Patriarchy, against which they had waged a long-standing bloody struggle and had barely escaped its vampire claws. So see how he treats the Patriarchy's influence. The slogan was, far from Bulgaria, not because Bulgaria was to be blamed for the situation in Macedonia. They knew that Bulgaria had no capacity to influence that, but because any suspicion of her interference could harm both her, Bulgaria, and the cause, the liberation of Macedonia, which was to preserve its purely internal Macedonian character. So again, this is what he means by internal Macedonian character. We need to liberate the entire region, regardless of whether we're Bulgarians, Macedonian Bulgarians, or Macedonian Greeks or Turks or any non-Bulgarians, That's our cause, liberation. And in that context of the liberation, we should stay away from Bulgaria. A, because Bulgaria cannot really help us. B, because if we're caught that we're collaborating with Bulgaria, then Bulgaria can get penalized by the Ottomans and the great powers, as we read. And the only way to do that was to get our own internal organization. That's what Poparsov says. And we needed that organization, Poparsov says, because, first of all, not only the Greeks whom we fought to get our own churches are challenging us, but also the Serbian influence, particularly after 1878, became much stronger, and that happened particularly in the northern and in the western part, in this Kumanovo part of Skopje, part of Tetovo, part of Gostiva regions, And what he's saying is that oftentimes the deal was that the Serbs were having a deal with the Greeks, that basically they were pressing, just like Bulgarians got their own churches for the Slavic-speaking population under the Exarchate, that the patriarchy in this case could claim again some authority of villages or churches that could be yielded to the Serbian authorities, and they would start organizing services in Serbia, and most importantly, opening schools in Serbia. Because Greek churches and schools were not very popular in that area among particularly Slavic-speaking population. What the Greeks would do is would secure a patriarchy permits, the fermans or permits for the churches and schools, and then the Serbs will go get in and teach Serbian and do Serbian church activities in that region. Of course, Serbs were the latest to come. They had already operating in an environment where there was well-established Bulgarian, but also Greek patriarchy influence, so they had the weakest influence. And they figured out that the only way, obviously their competitors were the Bulgarians for the Slavic-speaking population, and the way that they could do is by cutting a deal with the patriarchy, so that the patriarchy would get the permits and yield that to the Serbs so they can become active. And so Poparsov says this was a double threat. So on the one hand, you're fighting the Greeks, you're fighting the liberation of Macedonia from the Ottomans, and then the Serbs are coming also and expanding. And what he concludes is, on these clear and precisely defined foundations, the first secret, that's the first name, Committee for the Acquisition of the Political Rights of Macedonia, given to it by the Treaty of Berlin, was formed, from which the so-called Internal Macedonian Revolutionary Organization later developed. He also missed the word Adrianople, Georgi. I'm so sorry about that. But yes, Internal Macedonian Adrianople Revolutionary. You can see that its first name was not only the Bulgarian Macedonian Revolutionary Committees, but also the Committee for the Acquisition of the Political Rights of Macedonia, given to it by the Treaty of Berlin. Why? Because Article 23 of the Treaty of Berlin provided that should there be a necessity, it is possible to restore constitutional rights or to establish constitutional rights in parts of European Turkey. That's all that the Article 23 of the Berlin Treaty said. But what they took it is, okay, constitutional rights meant under the IMRO, under the founders of the IMRO, an opportunity to write a constitution on a specific territory, and that constitution will ensure not only rights, but it will also ensure political autonomy, just like political autonomy that Eastern Romania had gained before that. So that's why they selected, as claimed by Poparsov, that to be one of the first names. Of course, it was too long and too clumsy, and then it ended up being Bulgarian Macedonian, but then they realized that excludes everybody who is not a Bulgarian, so that's why they settled upon the Macedonian Revolutionary Organization, or the Internal Macedonian Adrianople Revolutionary Organization, just because Adrianople was never a part of Macedonia. And then we continue with the fourth founder, Anton Dimitrov. Anton Dimitrov was...
Can I shortly...
Yes, go ahead.
Here for a short time, just take a break.
Please, go ahead.
Drink water. So, the topic of the name of the organization. So several persons, Tatarchev, Poparsov, and I don't remember who was the third, gave three different possible names. So actually in the beginning, there was no specific name of the organization, but there was an idea. And Tatarchev added to what Poparsov wrote. Yes, it was about Macedonia. And he wrote in his memoirs, published by Professor Miletic, at the beginning, Adrianopolitan wasn't part of the idea. We added it later. And it actually happened 3 years later when the first constitution of the organization was adopted by the organization. So it became then the Bulgarian, Macedonian, Adrianopolitan Revolutionary Committees. And another thing, one of our viewers, Alexander, is asking whether Professor Gordana Silyanovska-Davkova will now understand what was said here and whether she's satisfied. Alexander has a very good sense of humor. He reminds us about the recent visit of the president of North Macedonia in Sofia when Professor Siljanovska-Davkova refused to speak in her own language with the Bulgarian diplomats by the argument that she would not understand if their Bulgarian colleagues speak in Bulgarian, so she preferred to speak in English. So Alexander remembers this, and he reminds us about this. Well, this episode, Alexandra, is not about Professor Siljanovska-Davkova. It's about the broad audience. There are a lot of people from the diaspora who actually have interest about these parts of the history, this forbidden part of the history, this forgotten part of the history of Macedonia, and the presence of the people who identified themselves as Bulgarians from Macedonia or Macedonian Bulgarians. It's about the people who really want to know history without propaganda. And I do believe that everything presented by Ivan D. Ivanov is evidence-based. It's not out of the context. It's really laying on the very strong and very well documented core of documents.
Gosha, can I just quickly respond? Listen, I unfortunately cannot make that presentation in Mandarin because I don't speak Mandarin. But si es necesario, nosotros podemos hacerlo también en español. Para mí no es ningún problema. Lo más importante es que la presidente de la República de Macedonia del Norte y todo el mundo puede aprender y saber lo que estas personas pensaron y el desarrollo del pensamiento en este momento. So I don't have a problem to do this presentation in Spanish. I don't have a problem to do this presentation in any other language that I can do it, just so that I can reach to a broader audience and people can understand that Macedonian Bulgarians existed, that they were an important, substantial element of the population in Ottoman Macedonia and in Ottoman Thrace. Georgi, well, Ottoman Thrace with Thracian Bulgarians, I apologize. And these people, not only did they exist, but they actually created a great intellectual tradition. They created a very powerful organization, and they fought for freedom. They fought for the liberation. They fought for civil rights. They fought for human rights. And this is our responsibility as present-day intellectuals, as community, and as Corridor 8 to make sure that the rest of the world knows that. It's possible that people don't speak our languages. I don't think Siljanovska-Davkova is one of those people, but there are others. So it doesn't matter. The language is just a way through which we convey the ideas. And that's exactly what we're doing. This has nothing to do with her. This has to do with reaching out a hopefully broader audience. And if you don't mind, I want to continue with Anton Dimitrov. Anton Dimitrov, he published this article, My Odyssey in Bulgaria Daily, in 1913, and in it, he describes his particular experience in 1913, after before the outbreak of the Second Balkan War, the so-called Inter-Allied War, but right after the First Balkan War, when there are a lot of tensions in the territories that were occupied by the Serbian, by the Greek, and by the Bulgarian troops on the front lines, but also in the territories occupied by them. And so he at that time finds himself in Salonika as an intellectual, the founder of the resident of Salonika. He himself is from the village of Ivatovo, which is just right outside of Salonika. Was born and lived, and so he decides to take a diplomatic mission going to Skopje, Ushkup, and he has to cross from a Greek occupied to a Serbian occupied territory, and then meet with the Serbian authorities in an attempt to basically regulate and negotiate post-Balkan War distribution of power, of influence, and of course the borders and the status of the population. And so this is what he describes upon his arrival in Skopje. So he says that the situation is very tense at the border. He's being checked. He's being treated as some sort of a criminal, and he sees himself as a member, as a Macedonian Bulgarian and a member of the Bulgarian community in Salonika, Macedonian Bulgarian community in Salonika, and he sees himself as a notable intellectual. And he says, "I'm thinking that I'm going to an allied territory." That's not quite the case, So he arrives in Skopje. The first thing, he arrives at the train station, because the Salonika-Skopje train station, railroad line exists, and the trains were operating even though territories were occupied by Greeks and Serbs. So he took the train, he arrived there, and as he arrived there, instead of expecting to be treated with dignity, with respect, and so, because he represents an organization that was part of the Bulgarian national idea, but all three of them were allies. So he says, "Oh, I hope to be treated normally." And he said, instead he gets arrested and he gets thrown to the jail in Skopje, the central jail, which still exists. Now it's of course a museum. I'm blanking out. It's right near the Chershia in central Skopje. What was that called? Kuršumlija. Sorry, I blanked out for a second. So he's thrown in Kuršumlija, and so he's describing his experience of being thrown in Kuršumlija, in the basement of Kuršumlija. And so this is what his experience says. The guard began descending the stone stairs, and I followed him. So he goes with the guard and goes downstairs in the basement. I was completely overcome with horror. I had seen such a picture for the first time in my life. I was entering the darkness into a basement in the middle of the silence of the night. Twice I stepped on someone sleeping there. But who was that person? Who that person was? I don't know. The guard left and I was left alone. Where am I? What's happening to me? What will be my fate? Terrible thoughts began to disturb my soul. And what was this? What I had to wait for in a brotherly and Slavic country? Thinking he's going into the Serbia-occupied Macedonia, Skopje, where Serb authorities were running it. Involuntarily, my eyes covered with tears, and I cried with grief in the middle of the silence of the night because of the strong rage that had seized the Serbian people against everything Bulgarian. Then he says, I heard the clock striking at 3 o'clock in the morning. This is what he describes in the Kuršumlija events. He's held under arrest there. Tired from the long journey, he takes a couple of almost like a whole day with the train. The train runs very slow. Broken in spirit, I huddled in the corner of the room and began to ponder the fate of the unfortunate Macedonian Bulgarian who had remained under Serbian and Greek rule. Horror seized me when I suddenly heard a dull underground voice in the next room. A Serb? Your damned mother and faith Serbian. That's a typical Bulgarian way of referring to somebody who you disagree with, and particularly referring in this case to the Serbians because the person is being treated. I was born by a Bulgarian mother, and I will die a Bulgarian. Hit me as hard as you can. So apparently the person is being tortured. They're hitting him, and he says, your damn Serbian mother, hit me as hard as you can. I was born a Bulgarian, I will die a Bulgarian. You can beat my filthy body, but I will only hand over my pure Bulgarian soul up there to heaven. This is a very interesting description of the experiences of the people. So if somebody tells you that Macedonian Bulgarians don't exist, well, there you go. Ask Anton Dimitrov whether they did or did not exist, And then Anton Dimitrov wrote another article, which he published in Autonomous Macedonia, 1920-1921, 7 years later, when Bulgaria is being forced to sign population exchange treaties, the Molovka-Fandaris agreement in the same way that the Greeks are signing an exchange population agreements after the Greco-Turkish war with the government of Ataturk. So here's what he says about the idea. The idea of the convention is that Greeks can leave to Bulgaria, Bulgarians or Macedonian Bulgarians can leave Macedonia and settle in Bulgaria, and then each country that takes those is responsible to providing them housing and all this other stuff, And this is what Anton Dimitrov says. The sole and hidden goal of this convention is for Greece to expel the Bulgarian element from South Macedonia, replacing it with Greeks, and thus thwart the actual implementation of the clauses provided for in the General Peace Treaty, the New Peace Treaty, regarding protection of minorities, because under Woodrow Wilson, protection of minorities was first time incorporated after First World War, and it was part of the Treaty of Neuilly and the Versailles system of international agreements. Because there can be no concerns about the rights of the Bulgarian population, of the Bulgarian communities in places where they practically do not exist. So what this was trying to say, that the population exchange is to basically cleanse the territory from ethnic Bulgarians or Macedonian Bulgarians. And if they don't exist there, there's no need to respect minority rights. Above all, the Macedonian Bulgarian population cannot be subject to a convention to which it is not a party. Well, that's a legal, very important legal term, that you cannot sign an agreement because these people are not Bulgarian citizens. So why is Bulgaria taking a commitment to take them and provide housing for them against people who are not citizens? Well, international law is a weird animal. And as a weird animal, it oftentimes operates by the virtue and the force of the powerful. And unfortunately, just like Greco-Turkish population exchanges happen in that way, and it was some sort of an innovation in the legal terms, so was the population exchange between Bulgaria and Greece. So that was actually implemented. And then Anton Dimitrov writes further on, and given the fact that it has been, the Macedonian Bulgarian population has not been consulted, it will has to be taken into account. It has the right not only to protest most energetically, but also to consider the convention null and void with respect to this, namely the Macedonian Bulgarian population. When it comes to it, this convention is an act summarized in legal terms with the formula inter alios acta. Article 1 of the convention in question speaks about the population exchanges of ethnic minorities according to their faith and language. The goal is clearly evident here. The desired outcome is the expulsion from Greek Macedonia of the Bulgarian population, which is undesirable for the Greek state. It's very critical about this behavior. And that concludes actually this group of people who are the founders of IMRO, their identity, their vision about the struggle, and their handling of the situation following the unsuccessful Linden uprising, but also following the unsuccessful outcome of the two Balkan and the First World War. Before we move on to Henry Noel Brailsford, Georgi, do you have anything to add, or do you have something that you want to chime in?
No, thank you at the moment. But actually, yes, there's something which is off topic. I'm also a fan of off-topic questions sometimes. And there is something from Argir, from Tsarigrad. Since it was mentioned about the sad history of the Bulgarians in the Greek part of Macedonia now, he reminds us about the Greek Metropolitan Vangelos Kara, I don't remember, Germanos Karavangelis, who was very deeply involved in the massacres in the villages inhabited by Bulgarians, in the death of Lazar Poptraikov. And actually, part of the ideology of the Greek paramilitary organizations was something said by Pavlos Melas. And we have to remind this. This is part of the history. It shouldn't be forgotten. So in a certain way, we now understand very well the sad fate of the Bulgarians in the Greek part of Macedonia, in the Serbian part of Macedonia, which existence actually was denied first from these two countries, Serbia and Greece. And then it became the time of Yugoslav Macedonia, the Republic, the People's Republic of Macedonia, the Socialist Republic of Macedonia, now North Macedonia, which denies the existence of Bulgarians, but also tries to appropriate their cultural and historical heritage. So it's sad thing that actually three different national propaganda narratives deny the existence of the Bulgarian people on the territory of Macedonia.
Actually, the curious part about Pavromelos is that this is in and of itself, so Bulgarians should not be left out. It means that there are Bulgarians and you need to fight them in order to remove them. And this is the problem with some of the historiography in North Macedonia and some of the public opinion making, including the CEO of Channel 5, that we have some legal and other disputes going on. He says that these people never existed. Pavlos Melas never denied their existence. He couldn't deny the obvious thing, that these people exist and they had the right of self-identification. What Pavlos Melas is that they shouldn't be left, they should be eradicated. It wasn't a nice thing to do, but at least he recognized that they existed, because you don't eradicate something that does not exist. Unlike Mr. Mirchevsky, who wants to deny even the right of these people to exist before they're being eradicated. See, this is the ontological problem that we have, unfortunately, Georgi. But that's life, and that's the kind of stuff that we need to. That's why we do these shows, because we think that people need to be informed. Henry Noel Railsford, a very good Macedonian traces in their future, available on the internet. We've talked about it many times. We've cited it many times. Georgi probably can show the direct link where the book can be downloaded. It's also available on Amazon and many bookstores, but so here's what he says, and how he describes the Macedonian revolutionary movement. Important as the activities of the Macedonian Committee have been and may again be in Bulgaria, they have never gone so far as to compromise the genuine Macedonian character of the movement. And you can hear that also, clearly see that from the writings of the founders of the organization, that this has a Macedonian character, that it cares about the region of Macedonia. It wants to even detach itself from Bulgaria, from the Bulgarian government, from the Bulgarian authorities. Yes, it collaborates with them, but it's also aware that any connection that is established between them and the people in Sofia, the government in Bulgaria, the individuals in Bulgaria, can be dangerous for the movement itself, but can be also dangerous for the weak principality of Bulgaria. It's not led by Bulgarians, but by Macedonians. And by Macedonians, it doesn't mean ethnic or Asian Macedonians. What it means is people who originate from Macedonia, and as such, as Macedonians under Ottoman rule, are citizens of the Ottoman Empire. The Bulgarian government is naturally able to influence its policy. It must take account of all the diplomatic factors in its problem, but as much as could be said of the European powers whose attitude it watches closest, it has never, I think, surrendered its independence to any external pressure. Indeed, there is a strong current of opinion among the leaders of the Macedonian movement, which tends to be critical of and occasionally almost hostile to Bulgaria. And we explained that, yes, hostility is driven by two factors. First, that Bulgaria is not doing enough. And second, that whatever Bulgaria is doing, Bulgaria needs to be also kept away, because if it gets too much involved, that can jeopardize the principality, hence the connections that exist and the supply channels for weapons that originates. The younger generation of educated Macedonian Bulgars is profoundly distrustful of Russia, whose ambitions it dreads more than the decaying power of Turkey. These men can never feel quite sure of Bulgaria, where sentiments and intrigue and the proximity of the Black Sea Fleet make Russian influence powerful. And this is what we said, because even today, what is that, 121 years later, we're still talking about this, that Bulgarians in Bulgaria proper are, some of them are pro-Russian, while Macedonian Bulgars or Macedonian Bulgarians are very much anti-Russian. And they're very much anti-Russian because on the matter of Macedonian liberation movement, the Russians, for a variety of reasons, are not supporting that movement at all. And we know that for on a number of accounts, on a number of reasons, on a number of instances. And we also read in the New York Times why this is. Russia's weak to the east, and Russia's trying also to maintain the three-empires alliance, where the Austro-Hungarian, the German interests are oftentimes in conflict with the Russian interests. Bulgarians, however, don't always realize that in Bulgaria proper, and they oftentimes have a tendency to be more sympathetic toward Russia, which makes basically on the matter of Russia, Macedonian Bulgarians and Bulgarian Bulgarians are oftentimes at odds, and that's what Brailsford is documenting. It is true that the Stambolovist parties in Bulgaria are at heart anti-Russian, but they can rarely afford in office to give rein to the principles which they profess in opposition. No government in Bulgaria is anti-Russian, as Russian diplomats once remarked me. There are only degrees of Russophilism, love of Russia. The Macedonians, on the other hand, says, have their outlook on the Aegean coast, and they are not at all anxious to link their fortunes with those of the principality whose ports lie exposed to the Russian navy. Greeks and Serbia, and then the unique feature of the Bulgarian Committee is that it is a democratic organization whose policy and program are dictated by the Macedonian opinion, by the opinion of the people in Macedonia. In its original idea, I'm ready to believe that the Macedonian Committee had no exclusive racial ambition. Exclusive racial means ethnic. Racial here means ethnic, because they use Bulgarian, Greek, and Serbian and Albanian as races. They're in fact ethnicity, so nationalities, national ideas. Its leaders were Bulgarians by race and language, by ethnicity and language. And again, so their language, he calls the Bulgarian, and he calls their belonging to the national idea, the self-identification as Bulgarians. Clearly, no doubt about it. But their program has never been an annexation of Macedonia to Bulgaria. True. Hristo Tatarchev was very clear in his memoirs. We see also Ivan Hadjinikov. They're all very cautious about the idea how to present the organization. They wanted to fit in the legal framework that allowed them to operate under, and that was the legal framework of the Article 23. And so I see no reason to doubt their sincerity when they say that their aim is to create a free, neutral state under the suzerainty of the Sultan, namely an autonomous province, in which all the race of their distracted country might meet on a footing of equality and conduct their common affairs without regard to national ambitions. They were not at all first on the best of terms. And then Henry Noel Brailsford continues and says that the committee still uses its official documents, a language which implies that the base of its propaganda is not racial, and that it does not aim at a Bulgarian ascendancy. That's why it's a Macedonian organization, because it does not want to call itself a Bulgarian organization, because it wants to be all-inclusive and wants to wipe out the sense of race, namely national identity. But these, I'm afraid, are no more than pious memoirs of a better state of mind, in other words, wishful thinking. The atmosphere of Macedonia is so poised with nationalism, the three national ideas colliding that we talked about, that the most enlightened patriot becomes corrupted against his will. And yet, with all this reservation, it remains true that the committee does not desire the annexation of Macedonia to Bulgaria. That is, that its ideal, its form, at least in its international commonwealth, and that it gives proof of the sincerity by asking Europe for a European governor. So he says, okay, it really, I take for them for their word that they don't want to become part of Bulgaria. But I take them also for their word that proof of that is that they don't want to have one of their own, like Eastern Romania had Gavril Krstić and Bugoridi as the governor, but instead he said they want somebody from Europe, a European, and that tells you clearly that they're not planning to do a plot of unification with Bulgaria. They would ask, so he continues, this seems to be an important point, for the secret intention of the Macedonian Bulgars was to obtain autonomy as Eastern Romania did, merely as a preliminary to a coup d'etat and a sudden annexation to Bulgaria. They would ask not for a European government, but for some native Christian, like Bugoridi and like Krstić, who could be easily removed. Indeed, I believed so far as the Bulgarians, whether in Macedonia or in Bulgaria, speculate about the remote future at all. Their dream is that Macedonia should be certainly a Slavic country, but not definitely a Bulgarian country, and that it should eventually form a central state in the Balkan Federation, which might unite all Southern Slavs. Yes, we've heard that idea and we've cited that idea on many instances. Misirkov was one of the first initial proponents. We heard that left-wingers later repeating it. A big Bulgaria, which included Macedonia, was not necessarily in the books, he says. During the early years of the existence of the internal organization was a comparatively peaceful and inconspicuous society that could hardly be seen. It was occupied mainly with its moral propaganda, in preaching the doctrine of revolt, in founding on its spiritual side the idea of a Macedonian fatherland. So here it says, Imarov from the very beginning founded the idea of a Macedonian fatherland and talked about the doctrine of revolt. It also busied itself with the task of arming and drilling the younger men in the villages, but as yet the moment for raise of the flag of rebellion was sufficiently distant. So this was all true when before the rebellion was in the near future. But little by little, a variety of circumstances hardly foreseen in its plan of campaign drove it to more violent and questionable methods. Its activities in the country were where the Greeks are always ready to serve as the spies of the Turks, could not remain a complete secret. And so he says, yes, there is actually, he says furthermore as a footnote, the committee in some sections of it even contemplates in 1905 to impose a policy of the Macedonian Slav dialect in place of literally Bulgarian as the language of all the exarchate schools in Macedonia. Grammars are said to have been printed for this purpose. This seems to me to prove the sincerity of the local autonomous patriotism. So that autonomous feeling of the Macedonian Bulgars, their feeling of being a Macedonian alongside with being a Bulgarian, was obviously very powerful. The language disputes that existed in the 1840s and 1850s, by 1905, even though in the old exarchate system everybody was learning literary Bulgarian, and the so-called Ilinden alphabet was actually non-existent. This was literary Bulgarian. There was a consideration of readjusting a little bit the alphabet in a way that it could serve better the local speech. So we see that tendency documented by Brailsford during that period as well. Georgi, anything you want to add to this reading of Brailsford and the nature and the character and the spirit of the Imaro before we move to Chris Anastasov?
I like the way in which Brailsford presented the idea of the internal organization. It was a very inclusive organization. Macedonia for the Macedonians meant that Macedonia should be a common fatherland for all people living in Macedonia. And it is very sad again that today this expression, Macedonia for the Macedonians, is used not in this inclusive way of the founding fathers of the organization, and later by the generation of Alexandrov and Ivan Mikhailov, but it's used in a very exclusive way. Macedonia for the Macedonians, which is understood now as presented in the media in North Macedonia as Macedonia for the ethnic Macedonians. It's a very big deviation from the original idea. It's very important to know how exactly was created this idea and what meant Macedonia for Macedonians. This inclusivity is a value of the 21st century. And this is that we should respect. Thank you.
Thank you, Georgi. And so talking about Macedonia for the Macedonians is a wonderful segue to Chris Anastasov, who talks about the struggle of Macedonian Bulgarians in the book called The Tragic Peninsula, published in 1938. And he talks about Edicule, the prison of Salonika, where many of hundreds of Macedonian Bulgarians were kept political prisoners. Pavel Shatev, whose memoirs we read, and we will familiarize ourselves in a few minutes with it. By the way, Dicule still exists as a fortress. Also, if you go to Salonika, you can go and stop by and visit it. It's a little bit further north, out of the side of the Varosh, but it's very well preserved in its original format, so you can see where the Bulgarians were tortured. And of course, the Bezicule, that's the White Tower, without, of course, the walls, which were torn down, is one of the central destinations where people go and take pictures when they go on a vacation in Greece and go and have a coffee in the downtown Salonika. Well, you have to know that the pictures where you take is the White Tower or the Bezicule place where lots of Macedonian Bulgarians were held as political prisoners. That's known as the Bastille of Salonika. And talking about the Macedonians, here is how Chris Anastasiou presents this idea. The war for democracy and self-determination of nationalities failed to affect the situation in Macedonia. In other words, the democracy and self-identification was rejected in that period, exactly 1903, 1905, 1907. The Macedonians now renewed the struggle against their new oppressors after particularly the Balkan and the First World War, inscribing on their banner the motto Macedonia for the Macedonians. It is for this ideal that the Macedonians of today are struggling against the forces of conquest and oppression, against the brutal and tyrannical regimes of Belgrade and Athens. They never say about brutal tyrannical regime of Sofia occupying Period Macedonia. In fact, Period Macedonia is considered the only free part of Macedonia. In a recent declaration issued in January 1934 by the Central Committee of the IMRO, the following is noteworthy. The Serbian and Greek governments persist with their policy of violence and denationalization of the Macedonian Bulgarians. So IMRO 1934 talks about Macedonian Bulgarians. By the way, not only the IMRO, but IMRO United, the left wing, also talks about Macedonian Bulgarians as far as 1930s, as well as of all other nationalities in our country. It is to be noted with regret, and so on and so forth. It continues. In spite of the strenuous efforts on the part of the Bulgaria to arrive at understanding with the young Turkish regime, 1903, 5, 7, etc., the latest persecution and maltreatment of the Macedonian Bulgarians and the provocation against the Kingdom of Bulgaria itself did not cease. He goes on and says basically that the official report of the Bulgarian Consul in Monastir contains some facts concerning their anticipated scheme of the young Turkish regime in Zimbabwe. The ideologists of the Young Turkish Party had promised to the notables in the city of Fodon that if the Young Turks were supported in the coming election, there would be no Christians left in Macedonia in less than one generation of time. This, however, was not altogether an idle threat. The Bulgarian Consul General Stanika Shopov had reported in 1910 the indisputable fact of the decrease in the number of the Macedonian Bulgarians, something that we've also discussed in some of the population census data have confirmed. The gradual extermination of the Macedonian Bulgarians has so discouraged them that, according to a report of Mr. Shopov of March 13, 1912, they openly expressed preference for any alternative and promised them relief from their unbeatable lot. Let whoever likes come, provided he puts an end to our sufferings. Things cannot be worse than they are. And it kind of also very well documents why and how we see the shrinking of the number, and we see also the shift in identity. Bulgaria, which shelters today, he continues, over 600,000 refugees from Macedonia, had been reduced to impotence and cast out of the pale of humanity and civilization. And by whom? By Greece and Serbia, of course. These two countries who owe their territorial aggrandizement to Bulgaria's sacrifices became the new masters of Macedonia and made the life not only unbearable, but impossible for the Macedonian Bulgarians. Well, now it explains you why and who actually says Macedonian Bulgarians don't exist. Such were the shocking horrors inflicted upon the Macedonian Bulgarians by the army of Greece, the country where such brave beginnings in the art of peace, in the development of humane sentiments, and in the foundation of the enduring civilization have been made. The authenticities of both letters were carefully scrutinized and arrested by the impartial Carnegie Commission attested by the impartial Carnegie Commission in the inquiry, the Carnegie Commission, which we talked about also in this podcast. Where are the Macedonian Bulgarians today? Mr. Wallis says they have disappeared by shot, shell, and bayonet, by torture, by prosecution, imprisonment, and forcible exile. The whole non-Greek element has been destroyed or forced out in Greece. Nor have destruction and proscription stopped with the Bulgarians. Roman Catholics, Protestants, and mixed multitudes of Turks, Kutsu, Vlachs, and Jews have been impartially maltreated, robbed, and expelled at the point of bayonet. and so on, where they have withered into Bulgaria. At the present moment, more than 100 villages and several towns have been um, uh, which were in June last 1913 as peaceable and prosperous in any way in the Balkans, in which in point of good order and educate would have compared favorably with similar number in the Kingdom of Greece, lie wasted, roofless, and without inhabitants, and so on and so forth. So Anastasov describes basically the atrocity, particularly because he comes from the Aegean Macedonia. Down in the south, in the coastal, very, very southern part of the Aegean Macedonia. So he documents that very well, and is particularly interested to present in his work how that has happened. And of course, so the denialism of Macedonian Bulgarians is not by any chance, but it's also our responsibility to protect and to present the evidence in defense of the existence of Macedonian Bulgarians. And one person who attests for the existence of Macedonian Bulgarians is also Pavel Shatev. So let's read a few excerpts from Pavel Shatev, Georgi, if you don't mind, because we only have a little bit of time left. One group so he talks about the different groups of Bulgarians that existed he talks about the school riot in his book, the Macedonian Dariok, the Salonika Conspiracy, which is translated in Bulgarian and also, by the way, in Macedonian, but not in English. So here's what we're going to read an excerpt from it. So he talks about different sentiments of the local population, Macedonian Bulgarian population. One group favored a quiet educational struggle in the churches and school, following an evolutionary path, the so-called Macedonian Bulgarians, so that the Macedonian Bulgarians could gradually rise in cultural, educational, and economic terms, and occupy large and small offices in the Turkish state, and in this way to form a state getting ahead of the Greeks. This evolutionary group was led by the exarchists, the members of the Bulgarian Exarchate, who were hostile to any premature revolutionary activity against any conspirational struggle, believing that such premature struggles would worsen the situation of the Macedonian Bulgarian. The other group of teachers, together with a part of the citizenry, advocated in favor of the revolutionary method of action and could not yield to the demands of this first group. The MRO had already been founded and was gradually expanded its network of secret conspiratorial committees throughout Macedonia. The evolutionists raised the slogan of legal struggle, education, churches, and schools, signing the jingle, "Success is with us through labor and zeal," while the revolutionaries, alongside with their slogan, recommended and applied the revolutionary method of action, singing, "Freedom does not want the exarch." The exarch is the leader of the church. It wants the Karaja, named the freedom fighter, Stefan Karaja, who was the famous freedom fighter. And then Shatev also describes how the difference between life in Bulgaria, in Kyustendil, versus the life in Ottoman Macedonia. So he says during the day when he crossed the border from his Ottoman-controlled Kratovo to Kyustendil, which is under Bulgarian rule, I continued alone on the road to Kyustendil, while David, who was the person he was traveling with, stayed to wait at night to return to his family in the village of Trnovo. On the way to Kyustendil, I met travelers, men, women, and children. I was greatly impressed by the children who, with books under their arms or with bags, were going to school and were the first to greet with "Great to see you" from 5 or 10 steps away and pass by. The fields, meadows, hills, and mountains appeared to me in a different form, more beautiful, better developed, not like they were in Turkey. So here's his idealistic view about Bulgaria, and Bulgaria as a free territory, as opposed to Ottoman Macedonia, which is under yoke. The people in their costumes and face expressions look different, nicer, and more cheerful. It was my first time that I set my foot on Bulgarian soil, and in general, I had a very good opinion about Bulgaria. Even as a schoolboy, Bulgaria was pictured in my imagination as a promised land where there was full and true freedom and everything was in excellent order. I did not learn life in Bulgaria and only knew about the latter from the textbooks. Now, Georgi, do you want to add something? Do you have any comments, or we move to Count Lambsdorff's visit in Sofia?
There are a lot of things to be said about Shatev and his memoirs, but it's better to go on with the presentation. I think there are more than 10 slides left. I'm not sure whether we can conclude today, So it's up to you to decide whether we can do another fourth presentation in the future. But as far as you have the energy, we can continue.
I think we should let's have another slide of Shatev, and again, because we talked about the Russians and Russian position, and so this is in his memoirs. He describes in 1902 the situation where Count Lamsdorf, the Russian foreign minister, came to visit in Bulgaria, and so the Macedonian Bulgarians organized themselves to give him a warm welcome and to ask him for support for the liberation cause. And this is what happened. Let's read that part. In 1902, power in Bulgaria was in the hands of the Russophile parties, the People's Party led by Ivan Eustatiev Geshet and the Progressive Liberal Party led by Dr. Stoyan Danev. In addition to the diplomatic actions taken through official diplomatic channels before the then Bulgarian government by the Austrian and the Russian diplomacy, the Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Count Lamsdorf, arrived in Sofia on December 13, 1902. Together with him came in Bulgaria the famous former Russian diplomatic representatives in Constantinople, Count Ignatiev. Graf Ignatiev, people in Bulgaria know who he is. He was the first governor general of the dead Kingdom of Bulgaria, after whom one of the main streets in Sofia is named, who was one of the preparers of the direct culprits of the Russo-Turkish War, which resulted in the liberation of Bulgaria. So they thought, okay, Ignatiev knows the Bulgarians, he helped liberation, so he should be very sympathetic about Macedonia. All we need to do is have all the Macedonian Bulgarians in Sofia go out and demonstrate, and he's going to love us and support us. Well, wrong. Count Ignatiev, in particular, was given a brilliant welcome by the entire population of Sofia, including the Macedonian Bulgarians. The next day, on the initiative of the Macedonian committees, a large demonstration was organized by all legal Macedonian societies and associations, in which alone was attended by more than 25,000 Macedonians. Until then, Sofia had not seen such an impressive demonstration. The last one lasted late into the evening, and a huge crowd passing along the King Liberator of Tsar Slobodita Street wanted to walk through in the middle of the Prince's Palace, where that evening a dinner was being given in the honor of Count Lamsdorf. Remember, this is a Russophile party. They want to have good relations, and they give him a special dinner, and the Macedonian Bulgarians use this as an opportunity to lobby for their cause, liberation. Predetermined Macedonian speakers like Atanas Naumov and others delivered short, emotional speeches right under the balcony of the palace, in which they outlined the difficult and unbearable situation of the Macedonian Bulgarians. So here's Macedonian Bulgarians that still exist, according to Pavel Shatev, in 1902, and expressed their satisfaction that the representative of His Majesty, the Russian Tsar, and the great liberator of Bulgaria, Russia, the patroness of all Slavs, was coming to us specifically to get to know more closely the situation created both in Bulgaria and in Macedonia, to see with his own eyes the pain and suffering of the Macedonian slave. In other words, to put his hand on the very one, to be convinced of the rightness of the Macedonian liberation cause. Most certainly, all those present applauded the beautiful and emotional speeches for a long time, loudly shouting, "Hooray, hooray!" or in Bulgarian, "Ura, ura!" Long live Russia! Long live His Majesty Emperor Nicholas II! Long live Count Lamsdorf for ours! Count Lamsdorf appeared on the balcony, and at the very moment that demonstrators made such a noise with their minutes and with their ovations, that he was forced to stand up on the balcony for 10-15 minutes and wait for the noise to subside in the midst of the many thousands of demonstrators, as if by special order of Count Lamsdorf, here in the center of Sofia, in front of the palace, all Macedonians has gathered regardless of professional ideas and beliefs. After a short silence, Count Lamsdorf took the opportunity and in a thunderous voice said that he thanked all the sympathies of the Bulgarian people towards Russia, noting that he would rely to his master, His Majesty the Russian Emperor, everything he had seen and understood. And he continues on. Many were greatly astonished when Count Lamsdorf briefly, clearly, and unequivocally stated that he had come to Sofia not to take advice, but to give one, and that the wish of His Imperial Majesty was that there should be peace and tranquility in the Balkans. In other words, keep the status quo, no autonomy, no revolution, no changes. Of course, the demonstrators automatically responded again with long and sustained applause and hooray, and Count Lambsdorff left the balcony and returned to the palace saloons. If there wasn't anything in common between us and then he continues talking about the connection between him as this group of the attackers, and the Imaro. He says that there's anything between us and the Central Committee of the Imaro. It was solely the fact that we operated in the same location, namely in Salonika. And based on this circumstance alone, the Central Committee could challenge us and could create obstacles and trouble for us. However, they did not have the legitimate right to consider Salonika as their reserved ground and base of action and to demand our, namely the Gemejis or the attackers, the removal from Salonika, especially given that the fact that the members of our circle still had a few drops of hot Bulgarian blood. So he says Bulgarian blood, which we wanted to shed in the capital of Macedonia. We wanted to sacrifice ourselves, if not for the freedom of Macedonia, that for us was still very far away and could be achieved without difficulty. That at least for the sake of us to express our own disappointment with and our indignation against the order of the Ottoman Empire, and to make it in a demonstrative way a statement of protest against the cruel tyranny that then reigned in Turkey and especially on the Macedonian land. In other words, no one could divert us from our desire not to look for a place in the revolutionary organization, not to seek positions and appointments, but to die as Macedonians in our native land, the capital of Macedonia. So he has a hot Bulgarian, but he wants to die as a Macedonian, somebody dedicated to the Macedonian cause. I think, Georgi, this is maybe a good place, going through some of the memoirs of Shatev and going through how basically Russia's position on the change of status quo basically was a big rejection of the Macedonian liberation movement in the Macedonian cause, and how he himself not only felt as a Bulgarian, but he also felt as a Macedonian, somebody dedicated to the Macedonian cause, the liberation of Macedonia, even though they chose an extremist methods of terror, rather than Imaro, which chose the method of insurgency and uprising, and each of them pursued their own paths. I think this is probably a good place to end the reading and the familiarity with the literature. I think we presented a whole bunch of individuals, leaders, revolutionaries, founders of the Imaro. We familiarized ourselves with how the press reflected the Ilinden uprising, of whose anniversary we're marking on this day, the Saint Elijah. And by the way, happy name day to everybody who under the Gregorian calendar celebrates Saints Ilian, and so on, celebrates the names day of Saint Elijah. And it also gives us a very good idea about how these people felt and how they documented their heritage, their identity, their heritage, their ideas, their struggle, and their dedication to the cause, the Macedonian cause. I want to give you an opportunity to maybe make a few comments, remarks, and of course, probably you would also wish everybody happy Linden, and this commemorate this. I'll use this episode to commemorate also the heroes of the uprising and this wonderful event, and the activists and fighters in this organization.
Yeah, I would like to thank you again for your extremely great contribution for the content that we create on the podcast, on this channel. And I believe that when we speak about our common history of the states, Bulgaria and North Macedonia and their people, we should look carefully about these sources, all this evidence that you presented. There are tons and tons more like this, but this is really a very good representation of some of the key figures in the history of the Macedonian revolutionary movement. And if we look at the future of our relationship between Bulgaria, North Macedonia, between the diaspora which lives around the world we should use the term back to the roots. Back to the roots of Tatarchev, Anton Dimitrov, Ivan Khajinikolov, Peter Poparsov, Damon Gruev, back to what they wrote, back to their legacy, and using it as a fair, just way to build a new relationship based on trust, mutual acceptance today of the people who live in our countries, and joining our forces to celebrate our common historical events, figures, and everything that was inherited from people like Tatarchev, Gotsedelchev, Todor Alexandrov, Miladinovi brothers, etc., etc., etc. And by the way, during our conversation, I received several reports about storms in Bosilegrad, in Plovdiv, and now there is a storm in my town, Khaskovo. So probably there is a kind of risk about the electricity and the internet. So it's a great idea to stop here. But I would like to remind you, since today, this is the day, Saint Elias Day, if I correctly say it in English, and this is usually the day of the storms and thunders, and I hear the thunders. So back in the day, we have such sign from the sky, and somebody reminds us, it's a gear, that today is the name day of the President of the Republic of Bulgaria, Mrs. Ileana Iotova. So happy name day, Mrs. President. Would that Argir remind us about this? And dear friends, I would like, at the end of this third part of the three-part series, Evidence for the Existence of Macedonian Bulgarians, to thank again to Ivan, to thank to all of you for your interest and patience and support. Throughout these three episodes, Ivan D. Ivanov has shown us clear historical evidence and very important documents from the period of the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century. So this evidence helps us to understand how people in this region called Macedonia saw and described themselves at the time. So, Ivan, thank you very much for your time, for your efforts, for the energy you used to make all these presentations, for your shared knowledge with us in these episodes, and your contributions will remain as a part of the treasure of Corridor 8 for all people who watch and will watch our episodes. And thank you again. I really hope that through your support and your participation, you help us. You help us a lot by bringing understanding about history, not division. And I really believe that through such episodes like this one, we continue our tradition on Corridor 8 to create dialogue. But dialogue should be built on honest conversations about the truth, about the past, on the Balkans, on Macedonia, and dedicated to everything that we want to be better for the future generations. Through exploring the past, through presenting the truth, we create better future.
Gosha, can you just give me a chance to also say a few things? Because I...
yeah, listen.
Thank you. Because I was guest at actualno.com on an interview that I gave on Thursday, and I saw that it again has caused some people to get upset about some things that I said. If people feel today as Macedonians, ethnic Macedonians or Asian Macedonians or whatever they want to feel, we have no problem with that. Nobody has a problem on this podcast. If the language is codified Macedonian language, that's all without any problem. That's never been an issue. All I have said is that, and I repeat it here again, that accepting this Macedonian-Bulgarian heritage as a part of the broader Macedonian heritage, part of more Macedonian history, but also heritage, the heritage of the people of this region, not as something exclusive or unique or something that belongs to everybody, but to part of the population. It only can enrich, indeed, what people who today identify as ethnic Macedonians or Asian Macedonians or simply Macedonians feel like. It only makes sense to embrace those people who feel like this, or those ancestors who, during at least significant portions of their life, identified as such and wrote works and memoirs to document their self-identification, not only their own, but also the self-identification of the people that they lived with, worked with, the organizations that they established, the churches, the communities, and all other centers, all the work that they did, and identifying as Macedonians, Bulgarians, and think themselves Macedonian Bulgarians only enriches present-day Macedonian identity. There's nothing to be lost and everything to be gained. And please don't talk to me about the Asian roots, the steppes of Asia, whatever the ancient Proto-Bulgars come from. This is such a bullshit. And those people who write those trolls and bots should be ashamed of themselves. They have no place in Europe. They have no place in the Balkans or in Southeastern Europe. They have no place in Macedonia. They have no place walking on the face of the earth. I am sorry to say that, but they should be ashamed, because denying the right, we don't deny anyone's right of self-identification. People are free to feel as they wish, to identify as they wish, but you cannot deny the right of others to do that, and you cannot deny a heritage that is well documented and of which we spent 2.5 hours showing that documentation. We will probably continue to do that because we're not quite done with Shatev yet. And I'm glad we did that in English, because at least we have that content in English now, while the Bulgarian language content, unfortunately, right now is not available. Hopefully it'll become available one way or another to our audience again. Thank you, Georgi, for the opportunity.
It was my pleasure. I'm not sure whether there is internet right now.
Who stood and listened. I can hear you well.
Because there are thunders right now, and a very big.
We had some thunders a few minutes ago, an hour ago, and I hope the connection went well. But I hope now everything's fine. Thank you, Georgi, and thank you.
I would like to add this sentence at the end of the episode, ladies and gentlemen. There are 3 states which officially denied the existence of Bulgarians in the region of Macedonia: Greece, Serbia, and today's North Macedonia. It's absurd that this slogan is today used even by people who claim to be victims of Pavlos Melas and his Andart movements. But our friend from Tsarigrad wrote, "Long live Bulgaria, long live Macedonia. The Macedonian Bulgarians are still fighting for their rights." Thank you, Argir. And
thank you.
This is what has real meaning for us. And this is what adds meaning and value to our work. So thank you very much for your support from Tsarigrad. Ladies and gentlemen, you can stay with us in the future. You can watch all our content, all our future episodes, since you know that Corridor 8 doesn't die. Long live Bulgaria. Long live Macedonia. Long live Corridor 8.